Let's talk Mormon dating culture. Buckle up because there's a lot to discuss here. Now, I grew up in the suburbs of Utah in a vast majority Mormon community, and so all of my schools growing up were vast majority Mormon. And I bring this up because there can be a lot of differences culturally with Mormonism, depending on if you grew up in a vast majority Mormon culture or not, or if you grew up in Utah or not. So this is me coming from a place of having grown up in a vast majority Mormon culture in Utah. I also want to mention how Mormons only believe in heterosexuality and traditional gender roles, so that's the place where this cultural discussion is coming from. It's definitely a ground rule that dating should only ever be heterosexual, but it's not the same as the other rules because, at least at the time of me being a teenager, there wasn't a lot of discussion about it. The thinking was kind of that to talk about it gives it too much power. And most members acted as if any of the LGBT plus issues were such a small, minor part of the population that it wasn't worth thinking about, so just be grateful you don't fall into that bucket. But the implication was that if you did find yourself identifying as LGBT plus, that you would engage in the lifelong struggle of forcing yourself to be heterosexual, cisgender, and conform to traditional gender roles. Let's all hope things have changed for the better since I've been a teenager, but I'm not really one to be able to say. The first rule of Mormon dating is no dating until you're 16. So before one turns 16, there's plenty of flirting and crushes and the like. I mean, teens are still teens after all. I remember passing notes with my friends about boys we had crushes on, and we would give them code names and, so no one would know who we were talking about, and we thought it was so much fun. And I remember being embarrassed to admit said crushes, but, if you ever found out that a boy liked you back, then it was all like, ooh, butterflies and excitement, and it would lead to a lot of awkward conversations in the hallway in which you couldn't quite look each other directly in the eye, and that's about it. Maybe some hand-holding. Now, when you turn 16, you can date, but there's no single dating, which means you and your date can't go out just the two of you. You technically could get a chaperone and do it Bridgerton style, where you invite your mom or your big brother or something, but that's really awkward, and so most people end up just getting a group of friends together for a date. Now, this led to the culture of official dates being pretty much just school dances, because otherwise there wasn't a lot of change in the feeling of an official date versus just the Friday night hang of getting all the gang together. So in Mormon culture, traditionally the boys ask the girls out on a date unless it is specifically some kind of girls' choice event or activity. Girls are highly conditioned that they must say yes to boys because it would be rude and impolite to say no. So for example, my mom had a rule that if I said no to a boy when he asked me to a school dance, then I was not allowed to go to said school dance no matter who else might have asked me. So the thinking here with girls not allowed to say no to boys when they ask them to a dance, or even if when you're at a dance and a boy asks you oh, hey, do you want to dance with me for this song? That's kind of the same thing. You have to say yes. And the thinking here is, well, it's just one song or one date or whatever. A girl can politely grin through it, and she doesn't want to be too picky or, particular, because she may find that then she is considered unappealing to the boys later. And also she may be pleasantly surprised. Maybe if she's actually just leaves herself open, then she'll find oh, I actually really like this person. They aren't who I thought. But it doesn't allow for the fact that sometimes people are truly creeps. It also assumes that all girls are shallow, and the only reason she would say no is because she's obsessed with shallow factors of attraction, rather than girls being rational human beings who may know what's best for them, or even in a worst case scenario, that a girl could have an intuition that may be very important for keeping them safe. So there was some awkwardness with the 16 rule because people turned 16 during the 10th grade. So if you wanted to ask someone out, you had to know when their birthday was. And in that vein, if you were a summer baby, then you just didn't get to date at all during the 10th grade year, which kind of felt like a big deal because, you couldn't get asked to any of the dances, but you were still allowed to do all the usual group hangs on the weekends. So it's not like you were so left out of the social group, because hanging out with the gang really didn't, again, look that different from a date. So let's talk about what a typical school dance date looked like. I had to say that 4 times because it turned into a tongue twister. So the dances were always either boys' choice or girls' choice. Most of the dances were boys' choice, and you would decide who you were going to ask, and then in asking them, it had to involve some kind of elaborate, creative way of asking them to the dance that also had to include a pun for some reason, but we were who we were. For example, a popular fallback was to get poster board and candy bars and then try to create some kind of message using those candy bars that you would tape to the poster board. Something like, hey, big hunk, I would give 100 grand and snicker with delight to go to the dance with you. Let's dance across the Milky Way at prom. Something like that. If you were really in the mood for something higher impact, then you would coordinate with their parents to go into their house when they were not home and decorate their room. You might do something like fill their room with balloons that then they have to pop them all in order to find a message that says something like, I would burst with excitement to go to the dance with you. Then you had to answer back in a similarly punny way, but the expectation was usually that the answer was lower key than whatever way you had been asked. Get some of your friends and their dates together to create a group to go to the dance together. And you would start with an activity during the day, something like sledding or doing a scavenger hunt at the park or something like that. Then everyone would go home and get ready for the dance and get in their dance wear. Then you would meet up again before the dance to go somewhere for dinner as a group. Finally, after dinner, then you head to the dance, and at the dance, you always have your first dance with your date, and the expectation is that you also have your last dance with your date, and perhaps a dance or two in the middle, kind of just depending how it shakes out. And then otherwise you dance with the other members of your group, or anyone who is at the school dance is allowed to come up and ask you for a dance. Then after the dance, the group would get together yet again to do an after activity, usually watching a movie or just goofing off at somebody's house. And that's what a typical formal date would look like. So another rule with Mormon dating is that at this point you would not ever get too serious about a single person. I think that this rule was a little looser and depended a lot on your parents. I heard stories of parents who wouldn't ever let their kids go out on 2 dates in a row with the same person. But also there were plenty of high school sweetheart couples at school that were really inseparable. Everybody knew they were together. But as far as teachings from church leaders, the expectation was that you wouldn't get too serious about any one person because it could be a threat to your chastity and purity and ultimately your eternal salvation. And so the idea was that this is supposed to be the time when dating is really casual and not serious. But again, what this looked like from the teen perspective was that parents might put a lot of rules outside of school, about on your time outside of school, about who and how often you could see someone. But when we were in school, we definitely knew who the couples were and who everyone was dating and such. So then we finally get to the rule where you are allowed to single date now at 18. But dating doesn't really end up looking much different until after high school, at which point you finally have what most people think of as dating in their minds, in which a person, usually a dude in Mormondom, goes up to a girl and says, hey, do you want to go on a date? And then the two plan a time and an activity to go do together, just the two of them. So in my community and experience, this is where I imagine most of the non-members finally started to diverge from the Mormon culture of dating. Because in school, any non-members were part of the minority group in that sense, and so they mostly went along with what the majority was doing. So they were kind of by default following the same rules as the Mormon kids, since the Mormons were the ones setting the tone here of what dating would look like. I would guess that probably many of them did in fact break the rules very explicitly and just chose not to share those things with the Mormon crowd so as to avoid the judgment and ostracization that would come at them from the Mormons. But from a Mormon perspective, it felt like they were mostly just going along and mostly keeping the rules that we all were keeping. I didn't feel that there was any pressure to only date members in high school because, for one, the dating was still so casual and you are in high school after all. But I do think that there was pressure to only go on dates or to couple off with people who held the same standards as you, which is another reason why I think that the non-members really probably fell in line with the Mormon standards, was so that they could just expand their pool of people who would be willing to date them and associate with them. And I'm sure there's plenty of uncomfortable feelings that arose from that, feeling like you had to fall in line or otherwise face a lot of judgment from your peers and be outcast from having any dating options. Now, the post-high school dating world becomes more complex and really diverges in experience between the boys and the girls. So boys are commanded in the church to go on their missions, which lasts for 2 years. And the lag time between high school and going on their mission can be really awkward. For the boys, the expectation is that you're definitely not thinking about dating because you don't want to get attached to anybody because you're about to go on your mission, and your focus really needs to be on the Lord's work. I remember there being quite a bit of drama at this point with my peers, as boys now have to cut off any relationships with girls that they may have been dating so that they can focus on going on their mission. Now, missionaries have very little contact with the outside world during the time that they are gone, and it's considered really inappropriate to have any romantic ties to anybody and to be too hung up on any girl because you're supposed to be focused on the mission. For girls, there's a lot of pressure to let go, not hold him back, not be a distraction, and to let him do his important work. When a guy finishes his mission, if he has followed the appropriate recommendation of the church, then he's 20 or maybe almost 21 by the time that he finishes. From what I've heard, because I am not a man, nor did I go on a mission, but from what I've heard, most mission presidents will take the guy and sit him down when he's about to leave the mission and tell him that his next directive from the Lord is to meet and marry a righteous young woman and get married in the temple very quickly. And I've heard things that mission presidents will say things like, I want to see a wedding announcement from you in a year. Keep in mind that this person has been out on a mission for 2 years, being told that they should completely block any ideas of dating or romantic relationships from their mind and be completely focused only on these religious, righteous duties. And now he's being told that he needs to completely shift his focus ASAP and meet someone, marry someone very quickly. As you can imagine, they come home really awkward. When I went on dates with returned missionaries who were fresh home, I can tell you that it felt like going on a date with an alien. Like, it was weird, trying to pull teeth. The conversation feels stilted and awkward, and it just is, it's weird. So for girls, the expectation is now you need to go find a righteous, worthy man, preferably a returned missionary, and get married in the temple as soon as possible. For both genders, it just feels really awkward. This shift of dating should be super casual. You may want to be more serious about dating, but don't. And to then have this sudden shift of like, now dating is about marriage, you need to get married as soon as possible. And to always have this question of your mind, even when you're on a first date with someone, you might be thinking, is this person my eternal companion? Which is a weird way to date. The tipping point for me when it felt like most of my girlfriends had gotten married was probably about 21. And by 23, I definitely felt like a spinster. And at that point, it felt like there were a lot of guys who didn't want to date me anymore because there's so much fantasy in Mormondom about marrying a young, naive bride. There's just something too threatening about a girl who maybe is a little more mature, more experienced, knows what she wants in life, maybe has finished school. With both genders, if you haven't gotten married by 24 or 25, then you definitely start to be seen as, are you weird? Are you undesirable? Is there something wrong with you? And there's a lot of shame about not living up to the perfect Mormon ideal plan. And a lot of other members might see you as, why are you not married? Are you lazy? Are you not righteous enough? Like, why are you avoiding marriage? Heaven forbid the fact that marriage actually requires a second party to like agree to be with you for, eternity in Mormonness, but like, whatever. The whole time that you're dating, the law of chastity applies. The law of chastity is no sex until marriage, no seeing each other naked, no touching of body parts, nothing until marriage. Basically, before marriage, only kissing and hand-holding are appropriate, but even kissing shouldn't become too passionate or heavy. There's even some crazies who want to save their first kiss for their wedding day at the altar getting married. I also had seminary teachers who would teach that Only a Disney kiss, like a peck, was appropriate before marriage. And even hugs, you shouldn't like be too full body with someone. That was considered inappropriate to have your whole body pressed up against someone else's body. Now, of course, most everyone thought that was dumb, but that's still your baseline, so that anything more than that, you feel like you're towing the line in some way. Now, some people might hear these rules and think, wow, that actually sounds kind of nice, and there's a lot of perks there. And even in making this video, I'm not trying to say that it was all bad. For example, I liked that I was part of a culture where I didn't feel pressured to have sex before I was ready. From talking with never Mormon friends about their experiences with dating, I definitely see now how your experience with dating depends so much on your peer group and community and what the explicit or implied expectations are. Those expectations may really work for some, and some people may really feel like they're winning at dating. And for a lot of people, though, they don't work, and it creates a lot of pressure and judgment and shame, which sucks. So with Mormonism, there was definitely a lot of shame and judgment built in, especially to follow that one correct path set out by God. And if you don't follow that one correct path, then you are considered unrighteous and your eternal salvation is at stake. Mormons literally believe that life is a test that they are trying to ace, and there's one correct way to do things, to have your life be, to have your life look. Also, you might think that it prevented teen pregnancy, but you would be wrong. There were definitely plenty of cases of teen pregnancy in my high school. And of course, it just means they faced a lot of judgment, a lot of hate, a lot of shame, and girls had to take the biggest brunt of that, of course. And as a last note, I never heard anybody talking about soaking. I definitely didn't know anybody who would have thought that that was acceptable under the law of chastity. But I know plenty of people who were towing the line and plenty of people who straight up crossed it. And unfortunately, I was definitely part of those group of people who were insanely judgmental at them about it. And now you know all the Mormon dating rules.